They called Vincent Harrington a man who could silence an entire room with a single glance. But on that unforgettable Friday evening, it wasn't his reputation that commanded the attention of every guest inside Belmonte, the city's most exclusive Italian restaurant. It was the relentless crying of his 2-month-old son. The elegant dining room shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters glided across polished marble floors with practiced precision, and a string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Yet none of it could drown out the desperate cries echoing from the corner table reserved for the most powerful family in the city. Conversations faded into uneasy whispers. Forks rested untouched on expensive china. Glasses of sparkling water and vintage wine remained suspended halfway to trembling lips. Noah Harrington had been crying for nearly 40 minutes, his tiny face flushed with exhaustion, while every attempt to comfort him failed. A nanny rocked him gently. Another warmed another bottle. Vincent's trusted physician quietly checked the baby's temperature once again before stepping back with growing concern. Nothing worked. Vincent remained standing beside the table, his tailored black suit perfectly pressed despite the strain settling across his normally unreadable face. The restaurant staff knew better than to stare, but curiosity proved stronger than caution. They had seen powerful businessmen beg for Vincent's approval. They had watched politicians wait patiently for his arrival. None of them had ever seen him look helpless. Across the dining room, moving almost invisibly between tables, Alana Brooks collected empty plates with calm, practiced hands. She was only covering an evening shift after another employee had called in sick. Most guests never noticed her. That was usually how she preferred it. Invisible people rarely became targets. Yet every piercing cry from the baby tugged at something deep inside her chest. She tried to focus on stacking porcelain dishes, aligning silverware, thanking customers with polite smiles, but the sound followed her everywhere. It wasn't simply noise. It was a language her heart recognized before her mind allowed it. Every instinct she had fought to bury for months suddenly awakened. She paused beside a service station, gripping the edge of a linen-covered tray until her knuckles turned pale. One of the servers whispered that the baby had refused every bottle since late afternoon. Another murmured that no caregiver had been able to calm him. Someone quietly suggested calling another specialist. Alana closed her eyes for only a second, but that single heartbeat carried memories she had spent months trying to survive. Her breathing slowed as an ache she knew too well spread silently through her body. She looked toward the frightened infant once more, then toward the father whose power meant nothing against the tears of his own child. Vincent noticed none of it. His attention never left Noah. Around them, the restaurant remained frozen in uncomfortable silence, every second stretching longer than the last. Alana lowered the tray onto a nearby counter, wiped her trembling hands against her apron, and took one careful step toward the Harrington table. Then she took another. Several employees immediately exchanged alarmed glances. One hostess quietly whispered her name, hoping she would stop before it was too late. A security guard straightened his posture as he noticed her approaching. Vincent slowly lifted his eyes for the first time in several minutes, meeting the gaze of a quiet maid whose expression held neither fear nor curiosity, only unmistakable compassion. And in that suspended moment, before a single word had been spoken, the entire restaurant sensed that something impossible was about to happen. The security guard instinctively stepped forward, his polished shoes stopping just inches from Alana Brooks, as if an invisible line separated ordinary people from the world surrounding Vincent Harrington. "Ma'am, please return to the service area," he said quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile silence that had settled over the restaurant. Alana nodded politely, but her eyes never left Noah. The baby's cries had changed. Most people heard only desperation. She heard exhaustion. She heard hunger. She heard a rhythm her heart remembered with painful clarity. "Please," she whispered, her voice calm despite the trembling in her hands. "I think I know what he needs." The guard hesitated. Behind him, the physician looked uncertain, while one of the nannies gently bounced Noah once again, only for the crying to grow even more strained. Vincent studied the young maid without speaking. His blue eyes were sharp, measuring every movement she made. In his world, strangers did not approach his family without a reason. Trust was expensive, and mistakes often carried permanent consequences. Yet there was something unusual about the woman standing before him. She did not appear curious about his wealth. She was not trying to impress anyone. She looked only at the frightened infant with quiet compassion that seemed impossible to imitate. "You have 30 seconds, Vincent finally said, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear. "Explain." Alana swallowed carefully. "Sir, I am not trying to overstep. I only recognize that cry." She paused, searching for words that would not sound unbelievable. Some babies refuse every bottle when they need something familiar. Sometimes they are not rejecting the milk. They are searching for comfort. One of the nannies immediately shook her head. "We have tried everything." The physician added gently, "We appreciate your concern, but this situation is being handled." Alana lowered her eyes respectfully. "I understand." She almost stepped back before Noah released another heartbreaking cry that echoed through the crystal dining room. Her shoulders stiffened. She could not walk away. Not this time. She slowly looked back at Vincent. "I lost my little girl 8 months ago." The words barely escaped her lips. She was almost Noah's age. Her voice remained steady, but grief quietly filled every syllable. "My body has not completely forgotten that I was her mother." No one spoke. Even the musicians had quietly lowered their instruments, sensing something sacred unfolding in the silence. Vincent's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The cold confidence that had defined him all evening gave way to confusion. He had expected another suggestion, another opinion, another expert promising impossible answers. He had not expected honesty delivered without self-pity. Alana continued carefully. "I am only asking you to let me try to comfort him. If it does not help immediately, I will walk away, and you will never have to see me again." She never mentioned details that belonged only to private moments between a mother and a child. Her request remained simple, respectful, and entirely centered on Noah's well-being. Vincent glanced toward the physician, who quietly admitted, "The baby has refused every bottle for hours. His vital signs remain stable, but he needs to settle soon." The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Outside, rain began tapping softly against the tall windows. Inside, dozens of strangers watched a powerful father struggle with a decision that no amount of money could make easier. Vincent looked at Noah's tear-filled face, then back at Alana. For the first time in many years, he realized that authority could not answer every question. Sometimes all that remained was faith in another human being. Vincent did not answer immediately. He simply extended his arms and looked down at Noah, whose tiny fingers had curled into trembling fists after nearly an hour of relentless crying. Every instinct inside him demanded caution. Every lesson his life had taught him insisted that trust should be earned, never given freely. Yet another voice, quieter and unfamiliar, reminded him that nothing he had tried had eased his son's suffering. Slowly, with a movement so careful that even the nearest guests seemed afraid to breathe, Vincent stepped toward Alana. She remained perfectly still, allowing him every opportunity to change his mind. When he finally placed Noah into her arms, it felt less like surrender and more like hope making its first appearance in a room that had nearly forgotten the meaning of the word. Noah continued crying for another few seconds, his small body tense with exhaustion. Alana cradled him naturally, supporting his head with practiced confidence, while speaking in the gentle rhythm that only someone who had spent countless sleepless nights comforting a child could know. "You are safe, sweetheart," she whispered. Softly, "You are not alone." Her words were barely louder than the rain tapping against the windows, but something in her steady heartbeat and peaceful presence seemed to reach Noah before anything else could. The infant's cries gradually softened into uneven whimpers. Several restaurant employees exchanged astonished glances. The physician quietly lowered his stethoscope, watching with growing disbelief. One of the nannies pressed both hands over her mouth as tears formed in her eyes. Alana looked toward Vincent with quiet respect before speaking again. "Sir, there is a private family lounge beside the wine cellar. It will be quieter for him than all of this." Vincent followed her gaze toward the elegant hallway leading away from the crowded dining room. He understood immediately. The music, conversations, lights, and constant movement had surrounded Noah from every direction. Even adults would have struggled with such overwhelming stimulation after a long evening. Vincent nodded once. Without a single order being spoken, his security team respectfully cleared the hallway while the restaurant manager unlocked the private lounge reserved for special guests. Alana walked slowly, never rushing, her entire attention focused on the baby resting against her shoulder. Each step seemed to calm him a little more. By the time they entered the softly lit room, Noah's desperate cries had become quiet sniffles. Warm lamplight replaced the bright dining room chandeliers. Thick curtains muted the sounds of the restaurant beyond the walls. Comfortable leather chairs surrounded a stone fireplace that had not been lit during the summer evening, but the room still carried a feeling of warmth and shelter. Vincent remained near the doorway, uncertain whether to approach or give Alana space. He had negotiated impossible business deals without hesitation. He had spoken before crowded boardrooms without a single note. Yet now he found himself afraid of making the wrong move beside his own son. Alana gently rocked Noah while listening carefully to his breathing. Her expression reflected neither panic nor urgency. Instead, it carried the quiet confidence of someone guided by compassion. Rather than fear, she glanced toward Vincent, her eyes filled with empathy instead of judgment. "He is telling us what he needs," she said softly. "Sometimes babies cannot explain with words, so they trust us to listen with our hearts." Vincent lowered his eyes to his son, realizing that for the first time that evening, Noah was no longer crying in despair. The silence that filled the lounge did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of a miracle no one in that restaurant had expected to witness. Alana carefully settled into the oversized leather chair, cradling Noah against her shoulder while the quiet room wrapped itself around them like a protective embrace. Outside, the restaurant continued serving expensive dinners and polished conversations, but behind the closed door, none of those things seemed important anymore. Vincent remained standing a few feet away, his hands resting stiffly at his sides, uncertain whether to speak or simply watch. The physician lingered near the entrance, respectfully keeping his distance while observing every subtle change in the infant's breathing. Noah stirred again, his tiny face tightening as another wave of discomfort passed through him. The soft whimper that followed carried none of the panic from earlier, but Alana recognized the sound immediately. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing instinct and memory to guide her. Her heart felt impossibly heavy. 8 months had passed since she had buried her daughter, yet her body still carried quiet reminders that motherhood did not disappear simply because grief arrived. She looked up at Vincent, her expression steady but deeply vulnerable. "Sir," she said softly, "I believe he is still hungry." Vincent frowned slightly. "He refused every bottle." "I know," Alana replied. "Some babies struggle during moments of stress. Sometimes they need comfort before they can accept nourishment." She paused, choosing every word with care and respect. "There may be another way to help him, but I will only continue if you are completely comfortable. Your son deserves your trust before anything else." The physician glanced toward Vincent but remained silent, understanding that this decision belonged only to the child's father. The room grew so quiet that the gentle rhythm of rain against the windows became the only sound between them. Vincent looked from Noah's tired face to Alana's compassionate eyes. He saw no desperation, no ambition, no expectation of reward. Only a woman carrying the invisible weight of a loss that had somehow deepened her capacity to care for someone else's child. "Will it help him?" Vincent finally asked, his voice quieter than anyone in the room had ever heard. Alana answered with complete honesty. "I cannot promise. Every child is different, but I believe it may comfort him, and I will stop immediately if there is any sign that it is not right for him." Vincent lowered his head for a long moment. Every protective instinct battled against every desperate hope inside him. Money had failed. Specialists had failed. Experience had failed. All that remained was the quiet confidence of a woman whose compassion had already accomplished what no one else could. He slowly nodded once. "Do whatever is best for my son." Alana thanked him with a small, respectful smile. She asked the physician and the staff for a moment of privacy so Noah could remain calm and undisturbed. Everyone quietly stepped outside except Vincent, who remained only after Alana gently assured him that his presence as Noah's father was important. She continued speaking softly to the baby, rocking him with patient tenderness while maintaining an atmosphere of dignity, modesty, and care. The room felt less like a private lounge and more like a sanctuary where fear slowly surrendered to hope. Vincent watched in complete silence as Noah's tense little body gradually relaxed in Alana's comforting embrace. For the first time that evening, he realized that true strength was not always measured by authority or influence. Sometimes it appeared in the quiet courage of someone willing to carry another person's pain as if it were her own. Minutes seemed to pass without anyone daring to interrupt the quiet that had settled over the private lounge. The rain outside continued its gentle rhythm against the windows while Noah rested peacefully in Alana's arms. No longer overwhelmed by desperate cries, but still searching for the comfort his exhausted little body needed. Alana remained composed, careful to preserve the child's dignity and privacy while focusing entirely on his well-being. She spoke to him in the same soft voice that had already begun easing his distress, humming a simple lullaby her grandmother had once sung to every baby in their family. The melody was gentle, familiar, and carried the warmth of generations rather than the perfection of performance. Vincent stood only a few steps away, watching every subtle change in his son's expression. He noticed Noah's tiny shoulders slowly relax. The tight lines around his eyes softened. His breathing became deeper and steadier than it had been all evening. The physician quietly checked the baby's color and pulse from a respectful distance before offering the smallest nod of reassurance. "His breathing has improved," he said softly. "His heart rate is beginning to settle." Vincent released a breath he had not realized he had been holding. For nearly an hour he had felt completely powerless, but now hope quietly returned with every peaceful breath his son took. Alana continued comforting Noah with patient confidence, giving him exactly the calm environment he seemed to need. She never hurried him. She never celebrated too early. She simply remained present, allowing the frightened infant to regain his sense of safety one quiet moment at a time. The silence inside the lounge felt almost sacred. Outside the door, restaurant employees waited anxiously, whispering only enough to avoid disturbing the child. Some had expected another failed attempt. Instead, they found themselves witnessing something none of them could fully explain. It was not wealth, medical expertise, or influence that had changed the evening. It was simple compassion expressed with extraordinary patience. Vincent slowly approached until he stood beside Alana. His voice remained low, almost afraid to disturb the peace that had finally settled over Noah. "How did you know?" he asked. Alana smiled sadly without taking her eyes from the baby. "When you spend enough time loving a child, you learn that every cry tells a different story. Sometimes they need food. Sometimes they need rest. Sometimes they only need someone whose heartbeat reminds them that they are safe." Vincent looked at his son again, then at the woman who had entered his life only minutes earlier as an unnoticed employee and had somehow become the first person to truly reach Noah that evening. He found himself remembering something his own mother had once told him when he was very young. "Kindness is quiet, but its voice carries farther than fear ever can." He had forgotten those words for many years. Tonight they returned with unexpected clarity. Noah slowly opened his eyes and looked toward Vincent before drifting peacefully back to sleep against Alana's shoulder. The sight struck him more deeply than any victory he had ever achieved. Around conference tables and private meetings, people respected his authority. In this quiet room, however, he witnessed something far greater than authority. He witnessed the remarkable strength of a grieving woman whose broken heart had somehow become a place where another child could find peace. And for the first time in a very long time, Vincent understood that some of life's greatest miracles arrived not with applause or recognition, but in complete and overwhelming silence. Morning arrived slowly, carrying pale sunlight through the tall windows as the rain finally disappeared beyond the skyline. The private lounge remained peaceful, untouched by the hurried rhythm of the restaurant beyond its doors. Noah slept more deeply than he had all evening, his tiny fingers resting loosely against the soft blanket wrapped around him. The physician quietly completed another examination before closing his medical bag with an expression of visible relief. "He is stable," he said. "He simply needed calm, reassurance, and the chance to settle. His breathing is completely normal now." Those words echoed through Vincent's mind more powerfully than any business victory he had ever celebrated. He thanked the physician with a respectful nod before his attention returned to Alana. She remained seated, looking more exhausted than triumphant. The emotional weight of the evening had settled across her shoulders, yet she never complained. She gently adjusted Noah's blanket, making certain he stayed warm without disturbing his sleep. Vincent noticed the tenderness in every movement. There was no performance. There was no expectation of praise. She cared for the child with the same quiet devotion she would have offered if no one had ever known her name. Outside the lounge, the restaurant manager politely dismissed the remaining guests from the hallway, allowing the family complete privacy. Even the staff who had whispered anxiously earlier now spoke only in hushed voices filled with admiration rather than curiosity. They had witnessed something that could not be measured by wealth or explained by status. A young maid had entered the evening unnoticed, yet compassion had quietly transformed the atmosphere around everyone present. Vincent walked toward the large window overlooking the city streets below. Luxury cars rolled through the wet pavement, while people hurried beneath umbrellas, each carrying burdens invisible to strangers. For years he had believed strength meant solving every problem through preparation, discipline, and control. Tonight his own son had taught him a different lesson. Some moments demanded humility instead of authority. He turned back toward Alana. "You saved more than my evening," he said quietly. "You reminded me that I cannot protect my son by myself." Alana lowered her eyes with respectful modesty. "Every parent needs help sometimes," she answered gently. "There is no shame in that. Children grow because many hearts choose to care for them." Vincent stood silent for several seconds, allowing those simple words to settle inside him. No executive had ever spoken to him with such honesty. No advisor had ever offered wisdom without expecting something in return. He looked once more at Noah, peacefully asleep after hours of distress, and understood that the greatest gift of the night had not been relief alone. It had been the restoration of hope. Before leaving the lounge, Vincent removed his tailored suit jacket and carefully placed it across the back of Alana's chair when he noticed she had begun shivering in the cool morning air. She looked surprised. "You will catch a cold," he said simply. She started to protest, but he offered the smallest smile. "Please, consider it a father thanking someone who showed extraordinary kindness to his son." Alana accepted the gesture with quiet gratitude, still unaware that this single evening would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. As the first rays of sunlight filled the room, Noah sighed peacefully in his sleep, and for the first time in many months, both a grieving mother and a worried father believed that healing sometimes arrived through the gentle compassion of an unexpected stranger. Vincent insisted that one of his drivers take Alana home, but she quietly declined, explaining that the city bus stopped only 3 blocks from the restaurant and that someone else might need the luxury sedan far more than she ever would. That answer lingered in Vincent's mind long after she disappeared through the front entrance wearing the same simple uniform she had arrived in. Before leaving, he asked the restaurant manager for her employment records, not because he distrusted her, but because he wanted to understand the woman whose kindness had reached his son when every resource at his disposal had failed. By late afternoon, a neatly organized folder rested on the corner of his desk inside his downtown office. It contained no scandals, no hidden fortune, and no dramatic secrets. Alana Brooks was 29 years old. She worked 2 jobs, one at the restaurant and another cleaning offices during the early mornings. She rented a modest apartment on the south side of the city. Her references described her with the same words again and again: dependable, gentle, honest, and remarkably patient. Near the bottom of the file rested a hospital document that explained everything the employment forms never could. 8 months earlier, she had lost her infant daughter after a sudden medical complication that no doctor had been able to prevent. Vincent stopped reading. The office around him seemed unusually quiet as he stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. He had expected hardship. He had not expected a wound so recent that it still touched every corner of her life. He understood at last why compassion had appeared so naturally in her eyes. It had been shaped by unimaginable grief rather than extraordinary luck. Across town, Alana unlocked the door to her small apartment just before sunset. The rooms were neat but simple. A faded rocking chair stood beside the living room window. On the bookshelf rested a framed photograph of a smiling baby wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Fresh white flowers sat beside the picture, replaced every Sunday no matter how tight money became. Alana gently placed her work bag on the floor before walking toward the photograph. She smiled through tired eyes. "I helped another little one today," she whispered softly. "I hope you would be proud of me." She remained there for several moments, allowing silence to answer in the only way grief ever could. Her phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. It was the restaurant manager thanking her for staying late and asking how she was feeling after such an emotional evening. Alana replied with only a few words. "The baby is safe. That is enough." She never mentioned Vincent. She never spoke about the attention she had received. To her, the evening had never been about recognition. It had been about answering a child's cry when her heart refused to ignore it. At nearly the same moment, Vincent closed the folder and walked into Noah's nursery. The little boy slept peacefully in his crib, breathing with calm, steady rhythm that filled the room with relief. Vincent rested one hand lightly on the edge of the crib and realized that every report, every investigation, and every background check had revealed the same truth. The woman who had changed his son's night possessed no hidden agenda. She carried only quiet dignity, enduring love, and the remarkable ability to transform personal sorrow into kindness for someone she had never met. Standing beside his sleeping son, Vincent made a decision that would alter the future of both their lives, not because he owed Alana a favor, but because genuine character deserved to be recognized whenever the world was fortunate enough to encounter it. 3 days later, a black sedan stopped quietly outside the office building where Alana finished her early morning cleaning shift. She assumed it belonged to another executive until the driver stepped out, greeted her by name, and handed her a simple cream-colored envelope embossed with the Harrington family crest. There was no stack of legal papers, no contract, and no promise of money inside. Only a handwritten note that read, "If you are willing, I would like to thank you properly. Lunch tomorrow at 1 o'clock. No obligations. Just gratitude. Vincent Harrington." Alana stared at the card for several long seconds before carefully folding it back into the envelope. She had never received an invitation written by someone whose name carried such influence. Yet the sincerity of the message mattered far more than the signature beneath it. The following afternoon, she arrived at a quiet botanical garden cafe overlooking a peaceful lake instead of another luxury restaurant. Vincent had deliberately chosen a place without photographers, business associates, or unnecessary attention. When Alana arrived, he stood to greet her rather than remaining seated. The gesture surprised her almost as much as the warm smile that followed. Noah rested peacefully in a stroller beside the table, his bright blue eyes calmly observing the flowers dancing in the summer breeze. The moment Alana approached, the little boy recognized her familiar voice and answered with a contented smile that immediately softened Vincent's expression. "He remembers you," Vincent said quietly. "His pediatrician says he has been sleeping better every night since we met." Alana gently waved at Noah before taking her seat. "That is wonderful news." For a few moments, they simply talked like two ordinary people sharing lunch. They discussed Noah's favorite lullabies, the peaceful walking trail surrounding the lake, and the importance of kindness during difficult seasons of life. Vincent never mentioned his business empire. Alana never asked about it. Their conversation remained centered on the child who had unexpectedly connected two strangers from completely different worlds. After the meal arrived, Vincent placed a small folder on the table but kept one hand resting lightly on it instead of pushing it toward her immediately. "I spent several days thinking about how to thank you," he admitted. "Then I realized gratitude cannot be measured with a number written on a check." He slowly opened the folder. Inside was an offer for a full-time position as Noah's caregiver, complete with professional training opportunities, health insurance, flexible scheduling, counseling benefits, and a salary that would allow Alana to leave her second job without financial worry. At the bottom of the final page, one sentence had been typed separately from every legal detail. "This position is offered because of your character, not because of a single evening." Alana read the words twice before quietly closing the folder. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she quickly brushed them away with an apologetic smile. "I do not know what to say." Vincent shook his head gently. "You already said everything that mattered when you chose compassion without expecting recognition." Noah reached toward Alana with tiny outstretched hands, laughing softly as she held one little finger. Vincent watched the simple moment unfold beneath the afternoon sunlight and realized that the greatest investment he could ever make was not in another company or another building, but in placing his son's future beside someone whose heart had already proven stronger than any title, reputation, or fortune. Alana accepted the position 1 week later, not because her life suddenly became easier, but because she realized that saying yes meant giving both herself and Noah the chance to heal together. Each morning she arrived at the Harrington estate before sunrise, greeting every employee with the same quiet kindness she had shown during her first evening there. She never behaved as though her role made her more important than anyone else. She still thanked the gardeners for tending the grounds, complimented the kitchen staff on breakfast, and remembered the names of every housekeeper. It did not take long before the atmosphere inside the mansion began to change. People who had once spoken only when necessary now smiled more often. Laughter occasionally drifted through hallways that had once echoed with nothing but footsteps. At the center of that quiet transformation was Noah, whose bright eyes followed Alana everywhere she went. He slept peacefully through the night, laughed freely during afternoon walks across the gardens, and reached for her hand whenever something unfamiliar made him uncertain. Vincent watched these small moments with growing gratitude. One evening, several months after the unforgettable night that had brought them together, he hosted a private dinner for close friends, business partners, and the employees who had become part of Noah's daily life. The atmosphere felt warm rather than formal. Candles glowed across the dining room, soft piano music floated through the house, and Noah happily explored the room with careful steps while everyone applauded his determination. As the conversation settled, Vincent stood and gently tapped his glass. The room became silent. Many expected a speech about business or another successful venture. Instead, Vincent looked toward Alana, who had quietly stepped aside near the doorway, hoping the evening would remain focused on everyone else. "There was a time," he began, "when I believed the strongest people were those who never needed help. I was wrong." I turned toward him. "The greatest lesson my son ever taught me came through someone the world barely noticed. She asked for nothing. She expected nothing. She simply chose compassion when it mattered most." Vincent walked across the room until he stood beside Alana. Without hesitation, he extended his hand, not as an employer greeting an employee, but as one human being honoring another. Alana accepted the gesture with quiet humility. Around the room, guests rose to their feet one by one, not because anyone instructed them to, but because respect had become the only appropriate response. The applause that followed was gentle, heartfelt, and free from spectacle. Alana lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness she had never sought. Noah laughed happily and reached for both of their hands at the same time, his tiny fingers linking them together in innocent trust. Vincent smiled through eyes brighter than anyone had ever seen before. "Thank you," he said simply, "not only for caring for my son, but for reminding all of us that dignity is never measured by a title, a paycheck, or the clothes someone wears. It is measured by the love they choose to give when nobody is watching." The room remained beautifully still as evening light faded beyond the windows and the first stars appeared above the estate. In that quiet moment, every person present understood that fortunes could build magnificent homes, influence could open countless doors, and power could command respect, but none of those things could replace the gentle courage of a compassionate heart. And on that unforgettable evening, everyone remembered what true dignity looked like.